And Jamie Raskin joins us now. He's the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, you see the images of what's happening on the ground there in D.C., and then now there seems to be backtracking on whether the National Guard troops who are deployed will be armed. How is there any legal justification for this?
Well, there's plainly no emergency. America saw a real emergency in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021. That's what a real emergency looks like, an insurrectionary riot against the Capitol of the United States where 140 police officers were wounded. There's nothing like that in D.C. That's why Donald Trump keeps talking about the graffiti, or he talks about the blight of homelessness. What are all those National Guard officers doing other than participating in a completely manufactured crisis? The real public relations emergency was, of course, the Epstein file, and Donald Trump moving to try to change the subject as quickly as possible. So let's hope this doesn't escalate into real problems because of the provocation organized by Donald Trump. In any event, even if there were a real emergency, Donald Trump doesn't have the power to take over the Metropolitan Police Department. He has the power under the Home Rule Act only of directing the mayor of D.C. to give police services in order to provide particular federal protection in the event of something like a riot or, an attack on a foreign dignitary. He could request some kind of police escort. But basically, these people don't really know what they're doing there, and they don't have any specific function. And as the chief of the Metropolitan Police Department put it, that's a very dangerous thing to be introducing that kind of confusion and chaos into the line of command.
Congressman, what do you make of these Republican governors sending additional troops into D.C. to be part of the Trump administration's takeover there? I mean, this means for the people who are deployed to do this, leaving their state, leaving their families, their day-to-day lives for this purpose. Are members of our military, to your knowledge, are they disturbed by any of this, uncomfortable with their service being used in this way on our soil?
Well, certainly the members of the D.C. National Guard, who are directly under the control of the president, despite Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton legislation to try to remove it from the president and give it to D.C. But those people are put in an uncomfortable position, but at least there's a kind of friendliness about them. When it started, people were taking pictures with them. They were just hanging out at the Washington Monument. They're not interested in provoking any kind of confrontation. But the National Guardsmen coming in from West Virginia and South Carolina and Ohio, who knows what their orders are and who knows what their attitude is coming into the nation's capital. So, this is a moment to de-escalate as quickly as possible. I think that the Trump administration recognized that they didn't have the power, nor did they have the expertise to actually run the D.C. Police Department. And it's not quite clear what all of them are doing. But for people in the resistance and in the opposition, it's a very clear boost for teaching America about the need for D.C. statehood. People in Washington for decades now have been demanding the right to be admitted into the Union. It's passed out of the House of Representatives twice when the Democrats were in control. And just like 37 other states that entered the Union from the original 13, this is a case that absolutely warrants admission to the Union. And so Congress must act. It's a simple majority vote in the House, majority vote in the Senate, and to be signed by the president. But that's very much got to be on the agenda of moving democracy forwards instead of moving democracy backwards to some kind of military rule.
Congressman, you've talked about the influx of troops from other different locales, many of whom we are hearing reports will likely be armed, and you've sort of leaned into the notion of needing to de-escalate before things sort of take a bad turn. With your district being as close to D.C. as it is, what are you hearing from your constituents? Is there any concern there about potential takeover of cities like Baltimore? I know it's been floated, but is there any concern that this may spill out from just beyond D.C. and into other locales? What are you hearing from the people you represent?
Well, the president keeps mentioning Baltimore and Oakland and I believe Chicago and Detroit as the next potential targets in this row of dominoes that are supposed to fall with Trump militarization for no apparent overriding purpose. Remember, crime is down in the District of Columbia to a 30-year low. It's down 25 or 30% just in the last 2 or 3 years. And there are similar drops in crime in Baltimore and other big cities. Some people have suggested that Donald Trump is hurrying to get in so he can take credit for these reductions in crime that have taken place. But I think you also have to see the militarization of these big Democrat-run cities, as they put it, in conjunction with the extreme gerrymandering and the imposition of voter disenfranchisement and voter suppression schemes across the country. This is obviously very much on Donald Trump's mind, that the public has really turned against his program, whether you're talking about the ridiculous tariffs and trade war that he's intent on, or you're talking about throwing 17 million Americans off of their Medicaid health care and dismantling SNAP food benefits for tens of millions of people, as well as his breaking of the promise to release the Epstein files. So he would like to change the subject, militarize the cities, and do whatever he can to depress and intimidate the vote by scaring people off from going to the polls in November of next year. Meantime, our party is doing everything in our power to mobilize America to get ready for these elections.
Let me play for you, Congressman, this soundbite from Ed Martin threatening to look into members of the January 6th committee and get your thoughts to it on the other side, because it all plays into this kind of attack by the Trump administration on those who serve in government, and not just cities, but even, as we've seen, institutions, the culture, the Smithsonian. But let me just play this and then get your thoughts on the other side.
Real quick, what about the January 6th committee? Did they destroy evidence? Is there criminality there?
Of course, we're all in that too. And trust me, a lot of people did not get a pardon that were involved in the select committee, and they ought to be keeping an eye on their mailbox, because there's a lot to be asked about.
A not-so-veiled threat, Congressman. Obviously, you were a key figure in that January 6th committee. Your reaction to that, intimidation nonetheless, but your reaction to what was just said?
Well, it's absurd. I mean, Ed Martin has been trafficking in January 6th conspiracy theories, just like he traffics in the election denialism about 2020. He's one of the people who still claims that Donald Trump won an election which he lost by 7 million votes, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College, and he's continued to spread nonsense theories about what happened on January 6th, when Donald Trump, of course, incited a violent insurrection, telling people you got to go and fight like hell, and if you don't, you're not going to have a country anymore, and all the rules are off when there's cheating at stake. And all of that was meant to surround what was going to be an inside political coup as they tried to force Vice President Pence to reject Electoral College votes from key swing states, including Georgia, Arizona, and Michigan and Pennsylvania. In any event, Pence stood up as a constitutional patriot. That's why they dumped him from their ticket and replaced him with J.D. Vance, who would be a loyal invertebrate supplicant to Donald Trump. But they have not contradicted a single factual finding that was committed to the January 6th Select Committee report, which was produced by a bipartisan committee with more than 1,000 interviews. We looked at more than 1 million pages of documents, and they have not been able to successfully contradict or undermine a single factual statement in there. And yet, like criminals returning to the scene of the crime, they can't leave it alone. They keep coming back to it. So we welcome the opportunity to continue to educate new generations of Americans about how Donald Trump and people like Ed Martin tried to overthrow a presidential election, and they were stopped by the courage of our police officers as well as political leaders. But 140 of our officers were wounded, injured, hospitalized, many of them disabled and disfigured for life, fighting to protect American democracy. So we're going to keep telling America the truth about it.